Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85. Some of you know me by that. Some of you know me by Walt. We are brought to you by the FTN Network, which is becoming a world-famous entity thanks to all the hard-working folks that we have, both working at FTN and those who are subscribed and working together in a really excellent community. I'm excited to be here tonight talking with you guys about college basketball. This is what we do. If it's your first time checking out the Super Show, allow me to welcome you and tell you what we do here is break down college basketball's main slate from a DFS perspective in a game-by-game format, tried and true. We'll be giving you a core group of 2 to 3 players that we're really high on, any applicable prize picks, although the board's kind of light right now, and any betting and or prop opportunities, which I also like to primarily talk about the DraftKings Sportsbook. It's just what's easily available to me. If you're watching live or on demand, I do appreciate that. If you could do us the honor of hitting the like button to show your support, commenting throughout, asking questions, comments, concerns, sharing throughout socials and everywhere else, I would definitely appreciate it. But if nothing else, a simple, easy like on the video helps us a tremendous amount. College basketball has been wild so far. As we enter the new year of 2024, it's very clear that we are in for a treat. As we enter into conference play, parity is wild. We just saw a game in which Illinois was getting dusted by Purdue, and despite their best attempts to collapse, hold on to win. And that just shows you that nobody's truly dead at any time. Anybody can beat anybody, and there are a plethora of games tomorrow that have some interesting spreads. Honestly, really good betting opportunities. This is one of the first Saturdays, I think, of the season where I've looked at the lines ahead of time and thought, wow, there are a lot of what I think are soft lines. Of course, Vegas always knows, as they say. But I think there's 3 or 4 spots that we can really look at and get in decently in an optimal spot and hope that it plays out. But I'm really happy. We're winding down college football. We have the Natty on Monday between the America's team, the Washington Huskies, and those other guys, America's villain, the Michigan Wolverines. There will be a Sunday night CFB version of the Super Show in which myself and Jay Kuchek will break it down in full from the showdown perspective, as it is a showdown slate. Then we'll close the book on college football, and we'll just be doing college basketball for the next 3.5 months. Nothing but shows, articles, content, wall-to-wall college basketball. Monday nights, Tuesday nights, Friday nights. As we get into February, we will be adding Wednesday night, and then pretty soon as we get into March and right before conference tournaments, we'll be doing 5 out of 7 days a week shows, possibly more. You guys know during the tournament, we really get into the grind. Pricing for DK all year has been phenomenal. If you guys are new, some of you are still kind of, checking in with college basketball. We've had some new subs who have checked us out. There are people who have played college basketball for the first time just this week. And it's only going to get better. Pricing on DK especially has been relatively tight all year long. That's given us a massive edge. The last couple of slates pricing has been a little wonky, a little more soft, which has led to some higher scores and, of course, penalizes the mistakes more. But we have had a good week. We had a little bit of a weird slate 2 days ago, but we are continuing to do our thing. Nothing gets us down. We tilt our faces off, celebrate, get to those green screens any way that we can. let's get into the slate here and now and start talking about what we love, college basketball. All right, Mississippi State versus South Carolina. This is a great slate, and there's a phenomenal amount of games all day. Not only do we have this 12-game main slate, but we have a afternoon slate and a night slate as well. Showdowns galore. There's just a ton. There's something for everyone. We will be definitely playing all of the slates. There will be the article for the main slate tomorrow morning as well. The afternoon will be Discord-only content. It's just really difficult to throw all these slates into a viable breakdown. And then there, of course, is the 9-game night slate, which will also have it. The projection sheet that we've been working with the last week and a half will be on the main slate. I will try to update that for the other ones as well. Not sure that's going to be possible, but there will be the screenshots posted in the Discord with the minutes and point projections for everyone in the main slate. I know you guys have been enjoying that. We're still fine-tuning it. It seems to be working okay. All right, Mississippi State versus South Carolina. Mississippi State 3-point favorites, the total of 136. Now, we have a variety of totals here, some as low as 127.5. You can imagine who that might be. Some as high as nearly 170, and that might surprise you what game that is. This particular one is 136. Looking at this first game, it doesn't really move the needle too much for me. Mississippi State is a team that is far more legit than I think people realize under Chris Jans. They have the top 15 defense, play at 171st tempo. Offensively, they're middling, definitely, but their defense really makes things happen. They have losses to Georgia Tech and Southern that they suffered in back-to-back games back in the end of November, early December. Wins over Washington State, Northwestern, Arizona State, a decent North Texas team, and Rutgers in a semi-away neutral court game there. Ken Palm score for this one, 70-69 in favor of Mississippi State. I do not think, even though it's a road game, it'll be all that close, and I don't think they're going to win by 20 either, but I think they clear that 3 relatively easy, and we're talking about a 7, 8, 9-point win for this Mississippi State team. Coming off the big win over Bethune-Cookman. The typical starting group for this team, we're going to get into some really important news here. Cameron Matthews, DJ Jeffries, Deshaun Davis, Shaquille Moore, and Jimmy Bell. However, the great news was Tolu Smith, the stud center for Mississippi State, did return after a long hiatus dealing with injuries and ailments. Played 19 minutes off the bench, 16 points, 9 rebounds, and a block. Granted, it was against a very overpowered and undermanned Bethune-Cookman. Just, obviously not the opponent to test out there, but it was good to get Tolu into the game, get into a little bit of a rhythm. It won't be a very long time before he ends up back in the starting lineup, a typical starter. Last year's rates for Tolu and what we expect him to get back to, 30.5% usage rate, 25.5% shot rate. Shoots 58% from the field, draws 7.5 fouls per 40, which was 5th best in the mark last year, 38% combined rebounding rate, and a 3.5% block rate, 4th best offensive rebounding rate in all of the SEC just a season ago. So you know how important Tolu Smith is. Who might he be jumping into the starting lineup for? I would say probably Jimmy Bell. We saw Jimmy Bell minutes-wise. He played 18. Ton of turnovers. Now, Bell did a nice job manning the 5 and taking care of business there for Mississippi State while they waited for Tolu to get back. So that was a really good experience for him. That's going to be key for them later on, as he's probably, like I said, going to be moved to the bench, but he's got that experience. And if something happens like foul trouble, which is something that can be a problem at times for Tolu, at least Bell can step in there and give them quality minutes. Now, Tolu steps into this one at 8K. If he jumps back into the starting lineup against South Carolina, I think it has to be certainly in consideration here. Very tough to want to go right to him, especially if he doesn't start. That would be a probably nothing more than a GPP look there, but as a starter, 8K, I do think that's a relatively advantageous price for us to go ahead and look at. Pulling up the sheet here. I'll have to add his name. Yeah, I don't have him on my sheet yet. All right. So I like him for sure as a starter, 8K. How could you not, right? As far as the rest of this Mississippi State team, they haven't been a real fantasy boon, and their games aren't really something that we necessarily want to stack by any means. And usually we've been staying away from them as a whole. Now, Cam Matthews has had a phenomenal season and has developed himself into a sort of alpha player for this team, which he will have some regression now that Tolo's around, but I do think he's solidly in position as the number 2 on this team. And you see, against a very tough North Texas team, 9 real points, but he put up 51 fantasy points thanks to 5 steals, 12 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 blocks. He had 6 steals against Bethune-Cookman. So I don't mind Cameron Matthews' exposure, but obviously that's going to be something that we're going to have to temper expectations with Tolo around, especially with anticipation of higher minutes. As far as our guy, Josh Hubbard, 6'2", just a luxury play. This price just isn't going down enough. We need to get him into the 5K range. He's going to be an ultra stud next year, especially if he sticks around, but really just looking at Tolo here, I think, for the most part. On the South Carolina side, prices are pretty, I guess, would be advantageous against a lesser defense. They feel like they're probably priced appropriately otherwise. Michi Johnson sticks out to me at 6'8" as somebody with upside for sure at that price point. We know he can gas up and put up a 50 of his own. Takes a high number of shots for the South Carolina team, but I think he's going to be bothered by this perimeter defense. He's not going to be able to drive like he wants to on that front court either. South Carolina, looking at it, they're 12-1, which is a great job by Coach Paris. They haven't played the strongest non-con. They do have a nice neutral court win over a Virginia Tech team that is better than they look on paper. Notre Dame, which they should have won, a tough George Washington team, and Winthrop. Losses, the one loss against Clemson, and that was a close loss at that. They had Clemson on the rope. So definitely a team that I think is going to look like a little bit of a pretender when it's all said and done. They're going to have some guys on this team that are a bit non-con heroes. Michi Johnson does lead the team in usage at 29.4% and at shot rate 31.2%. Both of those numbers are in the top 90. 36% three-point shooter, 20.2% assist rate, drawing almost 6 fouls per 40. 6'8", like I said, it's an advantageous price for him, but tread lightly. I don't know that he's going to be able to do the things he wants. We're probably looking at a sub-30 fantasy point game here for him anyways, but again, a GPP look, sure. Then you have a bunch of options at the value spots here. Guys like Zach Davis, who have been playing 17 to 20 minutes. It's really just speculative looks there. I don't particularly love this game. It's a 12-gamer. So let's move on to the next one, which is Marquette versus Seton Hall. Marquette 5-point favorites versus the Pirates, a total of 144.5. Looking at Marquette, you got Tyler Kolek up top there going up against this Seton Hall team. That'll be an interesting battle between him and Kadari Richmond. I think both perimeter defenses are going to cause a fair amount of turnovers. Doesn't necessarily hurt us all that much here on DraftKings. Kolek's back up to a price approaching that 9K range where he's more of a luxury, not a must. He's in that mid-30s range. He's definitely, a 4X performer. But I think a big slate like this, we could be looking at a relatively high-scoring slate. Obviously, there's going to be some landmines. I don't know that Kolek is a priority play for me, but he's obviously somebody that we want to consider just how good he actually is. The Seton Hall front court, to me, can be taken advantage of. They have Jaden Bediako, but then they have a lot of kind of uncertainty at the rest of the front court spots. This would be an Oso Ighodaro spot, but 6'8". He's still kind of just priced in that Creighton range from last year. Remember, the Creighton starters were all priced between 7 and 8K. They weren't underpriced. They weren't overpriced. They were just okay. And that's kind of how I feel about Oso here, especially after coming off a 2-for-11 game against Creighton in which he did pull down 16 rebounds. That's a pretty big anomaly. I don't necessarily think we see him pull down double-digit rebounds anytime soon again, but that is interesting to see that his type of upside does include that now, because I really would have never paid him for a big 16-rebound game. We had our time to shine with David Joplin as a value. He's been playing well as of late, which has his price going up. We do have Stevie Mitchell, who returned. He's sitting there at 4-3. I guess he can be considered. He's going to play around 20 minutes. He's got low rates, kind of a fit better, if you will. Not really a high-level value option there. They're still going to play Chase Ross, 18 to 25 minutes as well, basically splitting with Mitchell, just an okay option. On the Seton Hall side, Kadary Richmond there at 8-4. I'm curious to see what the ownership might end up being here for one Kadary Richmond, because we've seen throughout the course of his career, he's usually pretty chalky when he gets in the low 8K, 7K range. And he sits there at 8-4, coming off a game in which he took 16 shots. In the first half, he had a monster, like 20-plus fantasy points. Ended up finishing with 33.5 against Providence. Kind of a lackluster second half. He does that. That's the one problem I have with Kadary. When he's on, he is one of the best slate breakers in the game. But he goes long stretches of time where he just is not scoring fantasy points at a high level. And sometimes you just scratch your head like, how could this guy with the ball in his hands 24/7 possibly go 5, 6, 7-minute stretches with no fantasy points at all? One of the very, very tilting things that he does. But when he's on point, you're talking about a guy who can score 20 real points, pull down 8 rebounds, drop 8 or 9 dimes, put up a very big score. Overtime potential in this one, absolutely. I think Kadary Richmond will be up for this game, and this is one that I'm really intrigued and probably the one that I'll be watching in the morning. I will be jumping around streaming. North Carolina Clemson is on this slate. That's going to be a fun one, but I find myself intrigued by Marquette games lately, so I'll definitely be checking this one out. The starting group for Seton Hall, let's pull that up, with Dylan Adewusu in there. A strong win over Providence, by the way. I wasn't expecting that. We know, of course, Bryce Hopkins did get injured, which we'll talk about. Dylan Adewusu, Alamir Dawes, Dre Davis, Kadary Richmond, and Jaden Bediako. Pretty lean on the bench right now. Elijah Hutchins-Everett, who did have some starts earlier in the year, Isaiah Coleman, and then the other younger guy there, the sophomore Jaquan Sanders. The bench doesn't really give them a lot. Isaiah Coleman has shown promise, but they do rely on their starters a lot, which means Adewusu, Dawes, Davis, and Richmond are all pretty much locked into 34-plus minutes, barring any foul trouble. And sometimes those guys do have to play with fouls. That's something that we will see from Coach Holloway at times because they don't have anybody else. So it'll behoove Marquette to be attacking the rim, trying to draw fouls early and often. I think that'll be a strategy that we do see them utilize. On the Seton Hall side, outside of Richmond, everybody's price that's relevant above 6K. You do have Alamir Dawes at 5'3". I am not tempted to use him. Scoring reliant, takes tons of shots, but lately I've just been taking his unders on props, whether that's PRA. Anytime his scoring is projected at, or they give us a 13.5 prop line, usually take the under. So I'm not tempted by the 5'3" price of Dawes there. And I think at this point, the industry has kind of written him off as well. He was chalk for a little bit at the end of last year, but he's just not a player that I like to use at all. So you're deciding on if you want to go to Richmond or you're pretty much fading this one, I think, for the most part. Moving on to the next game here, we have Rutgers versus Iowa. This is an interesting one. This is one I kind of, had a side-eye about. Iowa 6.5-point favorites. The total is 152.5. As usual, we know it's going to be on the higher scoring side because Iowa plays at a tempo that's very fast. They're 9th in the country right now in tempo ranking. Defensively, they are very lackluster. We know they give up a ton of points. They just gave up 83 to Wisconsin's offense. They scored 100 plus against Northern Illinois. They give up 90 to a pretty mediocre Michigan team, 90 to Iowa State, which Iowa State offensively, they get after it on defense. They're not the most efficient offense in the world at times. They give up almost 90 to Purdue, over 70 to Seton Hall, 80 to North Florida, 80 to Oklahoma and Porter Moser's group, 90 to Creighton. So getting the picture here that Iowa gives up a ton of points. Rutgers is coming off a game in which they lost a close one to Ohio State, but they had a big performance from Derek Simpson. And I had been on Simpson early in the year, expecting him to break out. But he was very lackluster to start the season, found some minutes falling by the wayside, and he was getting pulled very early and not even starting some of those games. But with the Jamichael Davis, injuries that happened or the ailments, if you will, I know he did return, but with him having to sit at least one game, that opened the door for Simpson to get back into the starting rotation. And it is just a bone bruise for Jermichael Davis, but he didn't start last game. And when he did come in, he played just 12 minutes. They still utilized Simpson a ton. And in that game, he played 34 minutes, took 16 shots, and had a usage rate of 30%. When you look at the rest of what Rutgers did in that game against Ohio State, they got a nice performance out of Noah Fernandez as well. And Mawot Mag, but Clifford Omarui was non-existent, really didn't do a whole lot. Andre Hyatt was fairly non-existent, although he did rebound well, and they didn't get anything off the bench. Gavin Griffiths had hit a 3, and then they got 2-point basket from Austin Williams, but no one else on the bench scored, just 5 bench points. Simpson went on to score 23, 8 rebounds, which is phenomenal. I would never have expected that. 2 assists and 2 steals. Again, took 16 shots. So Simpson, he did jump in price from 4.6 to 6K, but he's getting this dream matchup against an Iowa team that not only should he be able to score on all the shot attempts he's been taking, in fact, 14 plus shots in 3 straight games, but he's also going to be able to cause turnovers and he's going to rack up steals. And you'll see he has 8 steals in his past 4, and that is something that is starting to become pretty consistent for him. Not to mention the rebounding that he's been doing and the high assist rate in conference play and the last 5 games in general. Derek Simpson is a very good play at 6K, especially if you want to go with a more balanced approach. Do I think he's going to be chalk at 6K? Maybe not, but this is a good spot. We're not chasing by any means. He is just a really phenomenal target for this squad, especially with Davis probably looking at a sub 20-minute role, at least for right now. If we think Simpson's going to be chalk here, Noah Fernandez at 5'7" is an interesting pivot. We saw him score 17 against Ohio State recently. He's nowhere near a consistent option and somebody that I would normally want to put into a main lineup. But for GPP purposes, sub 6K, Fernandez playing, 30, 32 minutes, absolutely in this spot, especially if he takes anywhere near the 13 shots he had against Ohio State. I don't know that continues. We've seen before that 4, 7, 6 shots, not the biggest shot taker, but it is something to be aware of. Jermichael Davis sits there at 4-1. If he got back into the starting lineup, that could work. Definitely something to keep an eye on, but I am a little bit leery there of him. If Andre Hyatt can stay out of foul trouble in this game against Iowa, I do think he is a posh play of the day candidate. I'm not going to give him that official designation, and if you're new, basically that's just my version, my variation of a sneak play. I think Hyatt is way too athletic for this Iowa team. I think he's going to pull down a lot of rebounds all over the place. If he can get some putbacks, great. If he can hit some threes, great. He's been taking a ton of them. Very versatile. This is a really elite GPP spot here for Andre Hyatt. Don't know that I'll be brazen enough to plug him into the main there because there are random bouts of foul trouble that he will get because of the nature of the way he plays, but I'm very, very comfortable with him and think he is going to be a matchup problem for this Iowa team. A little bit of value here at 5-1 with Mawot Mag playing 30-plus minutes, if that's the case, in a competitive game like this one should be. We just saw 33 minutes out of him against Ohio State. Now, he is a lower upside guy, but 5-1 in a traditionally hard-to-fill forward spot, definitely something to at least consider. Not a priority play, but if you fall into that range and you need a forward, there are worse things in life than playing Mawot Mag. That is for sure. And then, lastly, talking about Clifford Omarui, kind of sad to be like lastly, because usually you start with him, right? Price continues to dip. It got up there to a astronomically high level that we just couldn't touch because of the nature of how Rutgers plays. They're a team similar to others with dominant big man. Sometimes they forget how to make an entry pass or they completely ignore him in general. We saw that happen to Armando Bacot for a time in the last few weeks, although they seem to have rectified that in their last game. Omarui has moments where he just doesn't shoot, doesn't get the ball, and if he's not rebounding at a high level, he's not getting those putbacks either. The LIU game, they featured him. He had a ton of shot attempts, 15, and he just crushed it. But then you see that game against Ohio State, they didn't really work the post. He had 6 shot attempts. You go back to a tough game against Mississippi State where he had 3 shot attempts, and all of a sudden you're talking about a really risky player here because he's not being fed the ball and he's not going to generate anything besides those rebounds and block shots. And if he's not rebounding, or worst case, he's fouling, this could go sideways really, really quickly. The 7-9 price point is definitely intriguing. I agree, but he's nothing more than a GPP look at this point. This is a matchup he can take advantage of, but on the road against Iowa, I feel like refs are going to hose him with any bit of aggression that he shows. I foresee foul trouble in his future here, so tread carefully there. I would rather take the discount on Andre Hyatt, although the same foul trouble does apply to him. It's less of a risk for him than it is on Marui. And a 3-7, if we can get 20 minutes for Gavin Griffiths, he's at least somewhat interesting, but he's still a pretty raw prospect overall. For Iowa going against Rutgers, we saw Ohio State. They scored almost 80 against Rutgers. There were some pretty big performances from Jamison Battle, who scored 22 points. Bruce Thornton scored 24. And Roddy Gale had 11, 7, and 2. When you think of Rutgers, you typically think of a slower-paced team with a strong defense. They're actually 13th in the country in defensive efficiency. So we typically don't want to target against, Coach Pagio's team. And I think that's going to be the case here with Iowa. Looking at the Iowa group here and what they just did against Wisconsin, you have Owen Freeman in the starting lineup now, which is great. High fantasy point per minute player, high usage. Played 36 minutes in that game against Wisconsin, 14 and 13. He is definitely the real deal. This freshman, I'm not going to sit here and say he's the next Luka Garza because that's a bit of hyperbole, but he's certainly looking like he's going to be the next great fantasy Iowa front court player at this stage. Very early in his career is going to be inconsistency, but I think in the next year or two, you're going to be talking about Owen Freeman, 9K plus, as a guy that's putting up 40s and 50s with regularity. Peyton Sandford, who we love, dead-eye shooter. Tony Perkins, Patrick McCaffrey, and Ben Krikke, who is the transfer that came in with a lot of hopes from Valpo. Had some big games in the non-con. As we enter the conference season, I do think Ben Krikke is a very big favorite for a non-con hero. And if you don't know what that means because you're new to the show, basically a player who tears it up throughout the non-conference. They're playing teams like, let's say, North Carolina A&T and Valparaiso and, NC Central, teams that maybe don't have the firepower of the P5s, right? And they're putting up big numbers. And sometimes it can be hard to decipher. And then some people think when they go into the conference play, that's going to continue. And then you learn real quick paying $9K for Ben Krikke isn't the right deal because he's struggling in conference games. Now, he might be fine, but he's definitely a player that I think will become a bit of a non-con hero. And his price is going to have to dump down a little bit more. It is sitting there at 6.8, which has some intrigue to it by far. He did have a nice game against Michigan, 24 and 8. So he's shown himself to be capable in these spots. And the price is the cheapest I believe it's been all season, but I just want that to come down a little bit more, low 6K range. I don't know that he's going to rebound all that well. He struggled against Wisconsin and Stephen Crowell. He had major foul trouble throughout. They just did a really nice job neutralizing him, which did allow Owen Freeman to play all those minutes. Freeman comes in at 6'9". GPP galore. I mean, he's the real deal from a fantasy point per minute standpoint. If I give him 36 minutes, here, let's go to Iowa. I don't have this ready or else I would have shared my screen. I don't want to share it in its raw form here. And I'm also not a prodigy or anything when it comes to this. So if we give him 36 minutes, which is what he played last game, he just projects like nuclear, totally nuclear, right? So, I mean, his rates are phenomenal. I think we're probably looking at 20, let's say 27 minutes. Still puts him way over 4X, even at the 6.9 price point. So this is one of those plays that I'm a little bit leery about. Just like Keba Kaida for Utah the other night when he projected super well, and I kind of warned everyone hey, need some more games under the belt in this role to really kind of normalize him. He ended up playing 14 minutes. I don't think Freeman's in danger here playing 14 minutes. I know that as long as he starts, we can feel comfortable using him. The starting gig has been his the last 5 games. Now, the UMBC game was a blowout. Florida A&M was a blowout. Both of those he played under 20, and the Michigan game was the first game in which he started in his career. He played 18 minutes in that one. He had 2 fouls relatively early, which took a lot of the first half away. he did end up playing a lot of the second half there. So I'm at least confident enough to tell you that he's going to play 25 minutes as a floor, barring any foul trouble, and they're going to need him, especially his skill set. He just reminds me so much, and it's lazy of me because it's Luka Garza, but man, the way he plays is just so good, and he's going to develop his offensive skill set. He reminds me of Garza on offense already, and like I was not Mo Cisse. Who was on Memphis? I gotta look. I usually remember all these names. Let's go back to 20. Like a Dedrick Lawson on defense and his Memphis years. That's what he makes me feel like. Talk about hyperbole, right? But Owen Freeman, man, I don't know. I pride myself on being early on guys, and I am really into Owen Freeman right now. Interesting price on Peyton Sandford at 6'6", fits the mid-range balance type of build. 30 plus minutes like he just played against Wisconsin. Going to take double-digit shots. We know that. He is a relatively sound option. Not my favorite going up against Rutgers, but definitely someone we can consider. Does have a shot rate over 24%, and he's nearing 40% on his three-point attempts, which he has 92 on the season, which is by far the highest on the team. He is an absolute chucker. And then Tony Perkins, who's there at 7'3", just coming off a near 40 against Wisconsin. They relied on him heavily as well. Second time in the last 3 games that he scored over 20 real points. Don't mind Tony Perkins, but I certainly, preferred last year getting him at 4.5 and 5K. 7.3 is a bit steep for me. I'd rather take Sandford or Freeman, and neither of them or anyone on this team is going to be a priority for me. That's for sure. You have a little bit of value here with guys like Desante Bowen, but his minutes have been falling away. You have Patrick McCaffrey there at 5K. He's always going to get minutes, but he is kind of the inverse of Freeman, low fantasy point per minute player, at least recently. So I'm not really too high on any of the Iowa values at this point either. North Carolina versus Clemson. Clemson 3-point favorites, total nearing 160. So definitely one that will be on the higher scoring side. What is up? We got Alex in the house, NC State. Casey Marcel. Yeah, man. Casey Marcel. Gatorade Player of the Year at one time. I somehow forgot that. I was talking to someone today about Gatorade Player of the Year in the DC area, and seeing Casey Marcel's name, it was an experience for sure. But yeah, we'll see. Well, we got a DVP spot in that game, and I don't know if it's Marcel, but we'll get there. Anyways, UNC versus Clemson. Starting with Carolina, let's go down and talk about Seth Trimble, who played 23 phenomenal minutes against Pittsburgh in a game that they controlled pretty well. Pittsburgh showed flashes, but anytime they did, Trimble just was grabbing timely rebounds, hitting shots that he normally doesn't hit, and just overall being a menace on the defensive side. It's the second game in a row that he's put up 21 fantasy points. This is something that I've been waiting for a long time on Seth Trimble. All through last year, I was hoping that he would kind of kick it into that next gear as a pedigreed, recruit. Now he loses his spot kind of to Elliot Kadu in terms of younger guards. Only has a spot start way back in the November time against Northern Iowa, and his minutes just haven't really been there, and he hasn't been a fantasy option because of it. But we have seen him play 20 plus minutes in 3 straight, starting in December 20th in a close win against Oklahoma, then the Charleston Southern blowout, and then recently against Pittsburgh. Trimble is only 4-1 if we think these 20 plus minutes continue off the bench. And if they do, he's absolutely in play as a value, even against a Clemson team capable of making life difficult for the Tar Heels. So it's kind of a tread lightly, because if the minutes aren't there, it's a disaster. But if he plays 20, 22 minutes again, I like his chances of maybe not necessarily putting up a 20 plus score, but hitting 4X and getting value at the minimum. Speaking of Elliot Kadu sitting there at 4.6, his minutes have sort of leveled off as well. Now, he was into major foul trouble against Pittsburgh, which kind of opened the door for Trimble to play. So we might be looking at the blowout against Charleston Southern, the fouls on Cadu there against Pittsburgh. Might those minutes for Trimble be more of a mirage than something to expect going forward? It's possible. Neither of them are core plays, but I do have an affinity for Trimble and think he deserves more minutes. Cormac Ryan at 5'7", he's at least going to take a ton of shots. We know that. He can pay that off, get 24, 25 fantasy points. And okay, look, as far as anyone on this North Carolina team, he's probably the easiest to get to in your main lineup. Just know that if the shots aren't falling, I don't know that he'll be able to do enough other stats to actually pay that price off. Harrison Ingram at 7'5", the do-it-all guy. He is massive when Baycott's not playing well or RJ Davis not hitting shots. Ingram does a little bit of everything. 15 rebounds against Pittsburgh. Anybody that can put up 35 fantasy points while scoring only 7 real points is somebody you want to heavily consider. Now the Cam Thomas season, we didn't care about peripherals. We just rostered them. But typically we want those guys who are going to give us those consistent, heavy, high upside peripherals. And that's something that Harrison Ingram has done in his role with North Carolina. They may have whiffed getting our guy Dalton Connect, who's in Tennessee, but I think they did a phenomenal job of landing Harrison Ingram. And he's actually played pretty well in this Hubert Davis system. Say what you will about Hubert Davis, he's playing well. Now, North Carolina, 39th in tempo, top 25 in defensive efficiency, top 12 in offensive efficiency. The close neutral court loss to Kentucky and UConn. They also lost an overtime neutral court to Villanova. I think that game played today. I do think they'd win that game for what it's worth. And then the solid wins over Tennessee, Arkansas, Florida State, Oklahoma, and Pittsburgh. So North Carolina is certainly playing well. Ingram, as far as his rates, 20% usage, 21% shot rate, but he is making 43% of his threes. I think a lot of people maybe turn their head, sideways a little bit and not realize like this guy that's not scoring all that much. When he's taking threes, 56 attempts, he's knocking them down. 2.5% steal rate, 2% block rate, offensive rebounding rate of 8%. Really like Harrison Ingram. Again, if you're going with that more balanced approach, he's a great look. Somebody who is just kind of continuously putting up 30 to 35 fantasy points. And I do like him here in this spot. You have the 9K RJ Davis. I'm trying to think back to a time this season that I've used RJ Davis. I don't think I have. Certainly didn't use him at 9.5 against Pittsburgh. He, kind of had a down game for his standards, but we know he's going to play most of the game. He's going to take 1 million shots, contributes in all categories. This is definitely a spot for RJ Davis to step up and have one of his banger 40-plus fantasy point games. When you look at the various pay-ups, you've got Dickinson versus a beatable TCU. You've got Kevin McCullough, who's been just absolutely god tier. Devin Carter, who's going to have to carry a lot more of the load now. PJ Hall, who had a down game the other night, but I think he does bounce back. Janai Broom, who is my dude. And then, of course, Soriano, Richmond, who we talked about, Kolick, who we talked about, and Baylor Shireman, and even in the same game, Armando Bacot. So there's a variety of pay-ups you can use. I don't look at it and think that RJ Davis is like a lock and load at 9K, the best pay-up, but he's definitely very good. Speaking of Bacot, 8.3, had this been last year and you told me like, hey, you're going to have Bacot in low 8K range, I'd have been like, wow, it's going to be 90% owned, because how could you not roster our main Armando Bacot at 8.3? But I'm not so sure. I am not feeling a Bacot game coming here against Clemson. I think they're going to neuter him a little bit on the offensive end. And I think his rebounding upside is a little bit stuck here. Unless they get PJ Hall into foul trouble. Ian Schiffelin, who's taken that Hunter Tyson role, kind of talked a lot about that last time Clemson was on the slate. They do a good job of rebounding and on the glass. And I wonder what kind of, stat line we're looking at from Bacot. And if he doesn't get into foul trouble, he should get over 30 minutes, which puts him very much in play. But I just don't see this one going the way that most people would probably imagine it to. So I'm kind of leery on Bacot in this spot. I think on the road, foul trouble is a very big possibility. I worry about him actually getting enough shot attempts still to pay this off, because I don't know that we're going to see one of his big, 15, 16 rebounding games, not against this Clemson team. At least that's my take right now. Could be totally wrong about that. We could be looking at 70% owned Baycott in the morning. But there are definitely better spots I think we can target. But last game, it was good to see Baycott get back on track. They worked some offense for him. He did well on the glass, and overall, he got himself to the foul line, made things happen, generated those things, and he's actually a automatic when it comes to the free throw line, 80% shooter from the foul line, which is kind of an anomaly for big men at times. But not a Baycott hater, love him, but I'm just kind of tempering expectations compared to the rest of the industry. On the Clemson side, PJ Hall at 8.8. Come on down, not 9.8. We get a 1K discount after back-to-back games under 30. Definitely time to start loading up the PJ Hall shares. He had massive foul trouble against Miami. They were in full control of that game, but once he got into the foul trouble and couldn't get himself out, they quickly faded without PJ Hall. And it just shows you how important he is to this team. Clemson has built around him in such a wise way. They've got role players who all play a specific spot and have their own, aspect of the game that they add for PJ Hall. But you take him out of the key cog in the machine there, and you're talking about a team incapable of keeping up with a Miami team that scores over 90 points. And we did see that happen. So barring foul trouble, look for PJ Hall to have a big game. This is the cheapest price point he has been in quite some time. Looking back, I think the last time he was like under 9K was way back in November, early November at that. There is big time upside in this spot. Now, Baycott is somebody who does a nice job of drawing fouls, 5.6 per 40. He gets people in trouble. PJ Hall, looking at it, he draws about 5.1 fouls per 40. So something's got to give here. Ian Schiffelin is probably going to be there as well. You also have RJ Godfrey, who will be available off the bench to do some things and frustrate and harass Baycott as well. It wouldn't just be strictly PJ Hall there. Have some Ingram on him as well. But 8.8 is a very fair price, very high on PJ Hall as usual. That's my guy. If I have the affinity to build a stars and scrubs lineup, or hey, I do that semi-balanced thing and I have the salary to pay for one guy, PJ Hall's definitely trending towards being that one guy. Ian Schiffelin's a bit high at 7K, but he continues to produce another double-double against Miami. I just honestly fits that spot next to PJ Hall so well as the Hunter Tyson. Doesn't shoot threes like Hunter Tyson, but he rebounds just as good. He can score a little bit coming off a 33 against Miami. I'm not crazy about paying 7K for him. I'd actually rather just find another 500 to go to Harrison Ingram or pay up for PJ Hall. But every time I think Schiffelin is a write-off, he continues to produce. And I was pretty high on him last game. Didn't end up using him, but I did like him in that spot. But 7K, we're starting to talk about a real high price. And it was about this time last year when Hunter Tyson or season ago where he started to rise and getting up over 8K. And you had two guys on Clemson above 8K and nobody used Hunter Tyson. So it might become a situation where we overpay a bit for Schiffelin, but we get these big scores out of him. Other forwards on the team, Chauncey Wiggins, 5.5, playing big minutes. He's okay at 5.5. We know he can pay this off, but upside is kind of lacking there. Consistency definitely lacking. I like RJ Godfrey, but he's up to 4.9 here, which makes it a little hard to play him. He is getting consistently 18 to 20 minutes in the 5 spot there, and he does have a chance at more minutes here against this North Carolina front court. Guards-wise, Joey Girard, who plays a ton of minutes right now, sliding right into his Syracuse role, high volume, high usage rate, taking any shot that he wants, a ton of threes. He's actually been pretty efficient right now, and he's scoring at a very high level. Joey Girard props, anytime you see them at 14.5, 13.5, 15.5, you want to slam the over on those points props for Joey Girard. Chase Hunter at 6.3. Now, Hunter is kind of my sneak, but he's playing well lately. He scored 22 plus in 3 straight, and his price has ballooned. We're not getting him at that low 5K range, which is really where we want to be able to use him. Now, he's about the 4th or even 5th option on offense at times in this revamped Clemson team, but he plays his role very well. He initiates the offense, and lately he's been taking more shots, 15 attempts against Miami. Some of that had to do with Hall missing time, though, but he has taken 10 plus in 3 of his last 4. So Chase Hunter trending in the right direction. Yeah. Hey, well, I got to tell you, man, I try to pay it like I look at recruiting and I try to be aware of McDonald's All-Americans, but somehow I didn't know that Casey Morsell was a Mr. Basketball, a Gatorade Mr. Basketball. So it was a confusing time is what I should have said. Kentucky versus Florida. All right, this is the game. I gotta even double check because I'm worried I wrote it down wrong. 3.5 point favorites for Florida, which I think that is probably, we're going to see a lot of money coming on Kentucky. I have a feeling. My buddy Rob, who's a big Butler fan, he has the dog profile. You guys probably know him. If you don't, he's always tilting on Twitter. He's already talking about, and he's world-class jinx, by the way. That dude can jinx the bet like no other. He's just like backing the truck up on Kentucky. And I kind of feel like that's probably a pretty square thing to do. People playing Kentucky plus 3.5 against a Florida team that does give up a lot of points. The total, now it's 168.5. At the time, it was 169, so they brought it down a little bit, but still 168.5, almost 170 points. Now, we know from experience on weekends, especially, casual players come in, which we love more to fill up those contests. That football money's looking for something to do. And I know the NFL is playing also, but I'm expecting some non-grinders to play. And what they do is go to those totals and find that highest total game on the slate and start jamming players in. And when a total of nearly 170 is on the slate, that sticks out because you're looking at, 136, 139, 127, 134, 139, 140. Like, there's a lot of kind of lower scoring games on this slate, so it just sticks out like a sore thumb. And there are definitely options we want to consider as well. And all of the, my early tinkering of my, numbers here, Kentucky guys are just projecting to be absolute nuclear. It's shaping up to be a Kentucky, mini stack. Florida guys, obviously, as well. Like Reed Shepard at 7.9 is projecting crazy. Trey Mitchell, of course. Rob Dillingham, who's been awesome. DJ Wagner, who's 6'4" price point. Like, all of those guys are going to be over 4X for me. Florida, let's see. We have a couple busted prices on this slate too, by the way, which we're going to get to in a minute. All right, there's Florida. Alex Condon, who's been awesome. Tyree Samuel projects well. Zion Pullen. Micah Handlogden, which probably going to get into some foul trouble, but we'll see. Will Richard. So there's some really good options on this side. So starting with Kentucky. Very condensed rotation. This Kentucky team, I mean, this might be one of the best Kentucky teams Calipari's had in a very long time. And he's had some good ones. That run there in the mid-2010s, those teams were absolutely phenomenal. And I think we're talking about one of his best teams since the AD team. And I know there were some after that were just as good, but this squad is the real deal. Built to perfection, filled with one and done players, which is the Calipari hallmark, but getting Trey Mitchell in there, who as an undersized 5, I thought Kentucky was just going to get used and abused by solid front court players. And he's really held his own, and he's done a phenomenal job as a rim protector, hitting threes. Trey Mitchell has fit into this roster extremely well. Antonio Reeves, an upperclassman, experienced guard, able to keep it all together and for the team. They get Aaron Bradshaw in there as another young 7-foot shot blocker. And then, of course, Reed Shepard and Rob Dillingham, who have been just absolutely ridiculous. DJ Wagner, who's starting to come around and live up to his recruiting ranking. And then you have the other freshman, Justin Edwards, who many believe to be the best of all of the freshmen coming in. And he's actually not been very good compared to the rest, but you just know there's an explosion game somewhere inside of him ready to come out. And he had a really nice outing against Louisville, sitting there at 5-5. So I'm going to have some interest in Edwards as well. But it starts with Reed Sheppard as the most expensive at 7-9, playing mid-20s minutes. Not really going to be too many opportunities where he plays more. There could be if this, ends up in overtime or goes down to the wire and they need to go to him. But he's just been so efficient on a per-minute basis. Just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And his usage and shot rates are not that eye-popping, right? They're both below 20. But his true shooting percentage, second best in the country. Effective field goal percentage, second best in the country. Fourth in three-point shooting. He's making 56% of his 50 attempts. 5.7% steal rate, which is top 10 in the country. Like the Reed Sheppard has been just ridiculous. He's doing things that I think most people thought Justin Edwards was do. And if you're talking about a guy at almost 8K who is playing mid-20s minutes and not starting, it would be an easy I'm not using him. But Sheppard has just been so good in this role. Did have that start against Wilmington, by the way, played 39 minutes, but he's usually coming off the bench playing 24 to 25 minutes, and he's paying this price off. So don't shake your head and thumb your nose at this one, because he could very well be one of the highest scoring players on the slate, even though everything that we know from years of playing DFS, a bench player at 8K playing mid-20s minutes is normally not the play, but he very well could be. Rob Dillingham, kind of the same situation, playing, low to mid-20s. His efficiency hasn't quite been the same level of Sheppard's, but he has a very high usage rate, 30%, high shot rate at 30%. Both of those lead the team. Also coming off the bench, shooting 45% on his triples, 4% steal rate, 33% assist rate, which is top 40 in the country. So Dillingham and Sheppard both off the bench, about the best players off the bench you could possibly find, or at least the way that they're playing right now. I do not think either of those guys are non-con heroes as well. It would be a classic spot for them to be. The non-con schedule of Kentucky was okay. They played Kansas right on a neutral. Miami, which they just blew the doors off them. A tough St. Joe's team that they needed overtime to win. North Carolina on the neutral. And of course, a tough Penn team, which gave them a run for a while until they faded out. And then obviously they played Louisville. So I don't think they're non-con heroes. I think ultimately those two are very solid. Now you go to the other options on this team. Antonio Reeves, who's there at 7-5, the primary scorer. If the game stays close when they need buckets, we know Reeves is going to be the one to be taking those shots, generating points at the free throw line. He's very safe anytime under 8K, because we know he's a threat to score 20 real points. And at 7-5, he could theoretically make value on his scoring alone with 4, 5, 6 3-pointers that he can sometimes hit. He's hit 8 in the past 2 games alone. So Reeves at 7-5 is a very sound, economical play that I do like. Trey Mitchell at 7-1. Going up against the Florida front court. Now, he's not as much of a priority to me. He has been really good the last 2 games, but consider the opponents, Louisville and Illinois State. He's not as tough against teams that do have size, and Florida does. So I worry a little bit about his rebounding upside here at 7-1. He's more of a secondary play at best for me. And the same could be said for Aaron Bradshaw, who's sitting there at 6-1. Minutes are stunted at 20 max. Shot blocker, rebounder, but he's not going to be much of a scorer. 6-1's just too high. Now, his price is coming down a little bit after he put up that 41 against Penn, but it's not low enough yet. Once we get into the mid-5 range for Aaron Bradshaw, we can start talking business. Then you have DJ Wagner at 6'4", who projects as one of the better options, even though people are going to look at his logs and maybe, not that great. Louisville, he really wasn't good against Louisville. Probably had a little bit of an emotional thing going on there, right? Because that was the team that, his family's been involved with for a long time and was heavily favored to go there until a late change to Kentucky. But generally, I think we see in a close game, Wagner play 30 minutes here. Scoring wise, he is pretty reliant on it, but he does do other things. He has an assist rate over 20%. making about 31% of his threes. It's funny because he and Edwards were the two that most people were like, wow, they're going to be one and dones and so great. And it's been Dillingham and Shepard who have really kind of just showed out, while Wagner and Edwards have been just kind of not mediocre, but not to the level that we expected. But at 6'4", Wagner is absolutely a main team option. Now, if you can stomach Justin Edwards at 5'5", you've got something here. We need him to play 25 minutes at minimum, but I think there's a good chance we do get that from him. Now, he is a fouler. I think a lot of what happens here with Edwards is trying to force a play, trying to make a play. You know, when you come in with all these expectations and you struggle the way that he has, things start to get real, you know, that hoop gets tiny. You start stressing out, you're worrying about everything, and you're forcing shots, you're trying to make plays, you're trying to make a steal, you reach, you try to block, you body him. Like, he's overthinking. And when you watch Kentucky games, there's I'm not a psychologist, but you can tell when somebody's kind of overthinking things, or the way they hang their head on the way back after a missed shot. These are all things that I pay attention to when I'm watching games, to see people's body language and situations, and just try to see in these games how guys are acting. Because at the end of the day, we're putting this, you know, our funds and debating and analyzing 18-year-old kids, right? Sometimes 27 in the case of DeAndre Williams, but ultimately kids. And if you are raising kids like I am, you know how emotional those little bastards can be. So with that being said, and I say that with love to my kids, you just never know sometimes with emotional players and how performances can be. And you can never truly guarantee something's going to go right. Look at last night's KJ Simpson performance. Holy shit. What a terrible game. And Arizona's defense is good, but there's no way in hell KJ Simpson should have been just barfing all over himself like that. That was awful to see. So I don't know. I'm rambling on about that to say that Justin Edwards at 5'5" is a very sneaky option that I think people aren't going to use. I think he's absolutely a main team look. If we can guarantee over 20 minutes, I think he pays this off at a pretty high clip. He's still starting, so that's good. Has a shot rate above 20%. He's only making 26% of his threes, but he is a fairly strong rebounder. Does have a solid steal rate over 2%, 8.5% offensive rebounding rate. I have still high hopes for Justin Edwards. This is a classic buy low opportunity for him. And we're also looking at a situation here for Kentucky where guys like Adu Tiro, who did miss the Illinois State game, is considered day-to-day highly questionable. Him being out would be approximately 16 to 17 minutes to float around there, and that would kind of seal the deal for Edwards to get that work. On the Florida side, and I love this team. I love when they're on the slate, stacking for them, stacking against them. They're just involved in fantasy-friendly game galore, playing at the 13th fastest tempo, top 30 in offense, top 60 in defense. Now, Kentucky's tempo is 23rd in the country. So you're talking about two teams that want to push the pace under Calipari and Florida coach Todd Golden. Now, Florida has a early season loss to Virginia, close neutral court to Baylor, and a loss to Wake Forest that they probably should have never lost, but it was a road game. They have beaten Pittsburgh, Florida State, Richmond, and Michigan, which took double overtime in that game. Both teams scored 100. This is one that I could see ending up hitting 200 as a total. I know the 170 is pretty high. I know people will probably automatically want to take the under on something like that. I think both these teams are going to find scoring to be relatively easy, and we're going to see some really big stat lines from numerous amount of players in this game. Prices are pretty high, though, for the most part, so you can't just stack them in mindlessly. Starting with Tyrese Samuel, who transfers in from Seton Hall and has just been absolutely phenomenal for Florida. The season he has had so far, I think, is better than anyone could imagine, averaging over 14 points per game and over 8 rebounds, 32.5 fantasy points per game. A 22.5% usage rate, 32% combined rebounding rate, top 30 in effective field goal percentage. Then you're talking about a 5.5 fouls per 40 rate, 3% steal rate, 3.5% block rate. Does it all. Only thing he can't really do is shoot threes, but he is uber athletic. He is going to be up for this one. I think we see 30-plus minutes from Tyrese Samuel. 7.7's a high price, but you got to think of he's been over 8K for a week or two now. Getting him at a slightly depressed, discounted price, he's awesome. He's great. He is the top Florida play for sure. Lazy to say because he's the highest price, but if sometimes it works out that way, it works out that way. He does the most on this team from a multi-category standpoint. So I like Tyrese Samuel if you can get there. Some tough decisions will have to be made here in this game, though. Walter Clayton, who's sitting there at 7.4, he had the monster game, or the monster first half, I believe it was against ECU. His girlfriend had just given birth earlier. He is very scoring reliant. He has major slate breaking ability. We've seen that throughout in the first part of the season, especially. And he put up that 45 against Pittsburgh back in November. I always like Walter Clayton. 7.4 is a decent price. I don't think he's a main team look right now. He may end up being one later, but at the moment, he's more of a GP look because his streaky shooting. Other guys who did project well, Zion Pullen, which at 6'9", I don't know if he'll get enough minutes. That's one where I probably disagree a little bit initially with the numbers. He's also had some, lesser games and played some lesser opponents when he actually went off. So I need to see Pullen in a few conference games here before I really start pulling the trigger on Pullen, if you will. But at 6'9", he's also a GPP look. And Condon, who is just like going to be ridiculous next year, possibly this year if he starts getting more and more minutes, but a high fantasy point per minute guy, great rates across the board, really elite rebounder, somebody that I could see getting those additional minutes playing maybe 25-ish even. And if that's the case, he can definitely be a main team look, probably better suited for GPP right now because of the presence of Micah Handlogden and Tyrese Samuel, but he is really working himself into a rotational role where they're going to have to just start giving him more minutes. Will Richard over 6K is probably a no. He's generally going to be in that low to mid 20s. He started to really play well and doing what a lot of us, myself included, expected Riley Kugel to do. Kugel was on a lot of breakout lists, mine included. He has not been good. To the month of November, he was very solid. But once the calendar turned to December, it was like he completely got monstered and forgot how to play to a degree. It's suffered. His minutes have suffered. His shooting has suffered, especially 2 for 5, 4 for 16, 1 for 6, 2 for 10, and 2 for 8 over the last 5. Now, Kugel, as his price was dipping below 7K, it was like, man, we got to use him. I court him for a game or two, but he's just failed us time and time again. We are looking at a buy low opportunity at 5.8, but I am not confident in him. I'm much more confident in Edwards. I think the path to minutes and success are better for Edwards, and I think they're far worse for Kugel, especially with Will Richard playing better, Zion Pullen's presence, Clayton taking a ton of shots. There's just a lot of other options here in Florida. And you've got some guys like, Tyler Huff who have gone off randomly. So there's a lot going against Kugel here in this spot. I think he's just a wait and see play right now. I don't even see him having that much upside for GPPs at this moment. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have Georgia versus Missouri. Missouri 5-point favorites, 148 total. This is a game between two teams where outside of DFS players and the fans of those programs, I don't think many outside of those two groups watch either of these teams' games. And probably, as a DFS player, I bet you can probably say that you've watched maybe one Georgia game this year, if that. This is not a fun team to watch. They're not a very efficient DFS team either. They do play at the 108th fastest tempo. They have won a lot of games recently, which is a surprise. They haven't lost since November 19th against Providence. Wins in that stretch, Florida State, which Florida State's turning out to be kind of lousy, and Georgia Tech, and then a bunch of Mercer, High Point, Mount St. Mary's. So I think this is a spot for Georgia where They have a winnable game against Missouri. Then they've got games against Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, LSU. Like the losses are going to start piling up here, I believe, for Mike White. The starting group here for Georgia typically is going to look like Silas Demery, who is an intriguing freshman, Jabri Abdur-Rahim, RJ Sunahara, Noah Thomason, and Russell Tishwa. The bench pieces, Dylan James, Justin Hill, Blue Kane, and RJ Melendez, as well as Jalen Deloche. We don't see a lot these days of Frank Anselm. You might remember he was fantasy relevant for a week a couple years ago at Syracuse. And our guy Matthew Alexander Moncrief, who we all wanted, thought, and had hoped he would become an elite player at this stage, but it just never worked out for him. Looking at it, RJ Melendez leads the team in usage at 25.4%. Noah Thomason leads the team in shot rate at 27.7%. There isn't a lot to love. Silas Demery at 5'8" is the most playable. Talking about a guy who can definitely hit 4X in this spot against a Missouri team that I think is definitely taking a step back from last year. We've seen performances up from Sean East. He's been the best of his career yet, but Noah Carter has taken a clear step back, and they don't have the same type of weapons on their squad they did last year. They weren't able to fully replace them. So this is a susceptible Missouri team. I do like Silas Demery's chances at playing well and breaking value. Shooting 31% from long range, 3.5% steal rate, 22% assist rate, and a usage rate above 20% for Silas. Would have liked a little bit cheaper, maybe in the lower 5K range, but he's definitely playable at 5'8". More so than the guys above him, 6'1" Noah Thomason, who has erratic minutes, and RJ Melendez, who as a non-starter is looking at about 20 minutes off the bench, and he just chucks a lot when he gets in there, and he can get hot. He's also rebounding really well. He's always been a kind of a sneakier, high-quality rebounder. He's been super efficient recently, which is why his price is 6'3", and he's been paying off. But it's hard to get behind a guy playing about 20 minutes at this price point. Jabri Abdur-Rahim, who had a really nice first month of the season. Same thing. He's been kind of victimized by erratic minutes. Now, they had a blowout win last time out, which did cause him to play less. But even in the more competitive games, we're seeing him hover around the mid-20s range. 5'5" is definitely in play. He scored 29-plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3. More of a GPP look, though. I just don't have a lot of trust for Abdur-Rahim right now. I could see him getting some ownership, though, as the slate approaches. Just looks like one of those guys in that range that is, people are getting last man in spots around that range. He's definitely somebody to look at. I still have high hopes that we see minutes increases consistently for Blue Kane, an intriguing freshman with a scoring ability. Very reliant on that to get fantasy points. Probably not in play at 4-4, but it wouldn't surprise me for him to pay off if he gets 20-plus minutes. On the Missouri side, Sean East sitting there at 7'5". Now, Sean East, again, has taken the reins as the guy on this Missouri team. Noah Carter was destined to be the alpha, but his scoring has really plummeted, and he's having some pretty rough outings there for what my expectations were for him. Sean East playing 81.5% of the available minutes, 24% usage rate, shooting, this might surprise you, 57% from long range, third best mark in the country, slightly ahead of the boy Reed Shepherd. Only 2 players shooting a higher clip in front of him, Michael Ayaye from Pepperdine and Chase Cormier from Wofford. Wofford, a.k.a. three-point shooters U. Also, Tamar Bates on this list, top 5 in three-point shooting. So Sean East and Tamar Bates, teammates, lethal three-point shooters, both shooting above 55%. A ridiculous mark. Noah Carter, 22% defensive rebounding rate, has a shot rate the highest on the team at 24.3%. Shots not falling as well as they are for East, 25% on double the three-point attempts, 4.5% block rate. We need Noah Carter. I like Noah Carter compared to where East is at 7'5". Like, he's good in this spot against Georgia, but there are so many other 7 to 8K guys. I think it's a little bit harder to use East. Also, they have a rotating group of players around it, and they do seem to take turns with their production. But in closer games like this is projected to be, East should see 35, 36-ish minutes. And if that's the case, certainly worth a look at 7.5. But if you haven't been using him to this point, you're now buying it at the highest price. It's a little bit uncomfortable for me, and I'm sure it is for you as well. Noah Carter at 6.7. Just went through his rates. Forward option. Fouls come and go. He gets a little bit streaky. He just hasn't been making his threes, and that's something in the past that we could rely on him for. He's never been like this dead-eye three-point shooter, but he had very streaky games with Northern Iowa, and last year he had games where he just couldn't miss shots. But he needs to back off. He needs to attack the rim. He can't just rely on his three-point shooting right now because he's just not making them. 30 points in that blowout win over Central Arkansas. Shout out to my guy, Carl Daughtery Jr. for Central Arkansas. Talking to him and his dad on Twitter recently. Oh, not sure if you guys heard that, but all right. Wasn't expecting that. Anyways, Noah Carter is a really good GPP look. I don't think we can use him in our cash games, single entry, main team lineups at this stage, but if there was a game for him to break out and establish himself and kind of, still plenty of time to take that alpha role, this would be the game. Tamar Bates sitting there at 5'9", shooting an elite mark from three-point range, as we just mentioned. He shot lights out, 25 real points against Central, 35 fantasy points. I don't know that we can pay this 5.9 for him. He's generally under 5K. He's been a value guy. Minutes trending upwards. They're definitely relying on him, but 6K for Tamar Bates, it just feels a little bit reckless to me. And those minutes should continue to be there, as there is no Caleb Grill, who is dealing with the wrist injury. He will be starting to practice coming back, but right now there's still no Caleb Grill, and those minutes are going to Tamar Bates. Almost never like Nick Honor, who's sitting there at 5'6". If you look through his logs, not just this year, but over the last 2-3 years of his career, outside of the lone season for Fordham where he was awesome, he has never gotten back to that freshman level, and he's just way too inconsistent. Always an economical price, but never gives us the production that we would love to see in him channeling his early success there at Fordham. One freshman to note, who is going to be a really intriguing player as the season goes on and definitely into next year, is Anthony Robinson. He's going to be an elite player. He's not there yet, and you'll look at it and watch him play and be like, what do I see that you guys don't? But I really like the way that he operates. He's going to be a absolute lockdown defender. Already is. Just needs his offense to develop. Reminds me a lot of Corin Johnson in that regard. Defensively, he is a monster, but the offensive game is still too limited. All right, moving on to the next game here with the second half of the slate, and then we'll whip through here and get to some props and betting opportunities. St. John's versus Villanova. Villanova's 4.5-point favorites, a total of 143.5. I do like betting the Johnnies here. Not a big proponent of Villanova. We still have a banged up Justin Moore dealing with the knee issue. I think there is at least a chance, better than last game, of him playing. We'll see how that shakes out. If he doesn't play, Hakeem Hart is just, I don't know, man, a star at this point. I don't think we're playing him at 5'6", but without Justin Moore, we have to consider it because he's playing these big minutes without him. He's scoring again like we saw at his first year at Maryland. Haven't seen since. He's contributing in all other categories. He's usually a 3-and-D guy, and he's out there for his defense. But without Moore, he's gotten more opportunities, and he has definitely taken advantage of them. Although if you didn't get him at the sub 5K price, you probably missed the boat because 5'6" is a little bit more risky there. Jordan Longino, same thing, playing over 30 minutes in competitive games, 5'5". It's a little bit out of price for me on him. You still have TJ Bamba in the mid 5K range, only a GPP look because of his erratic production. Mark Armstrong playing that 20-25 minute role remains cheap, has not developed, really not in play, even though he's only 3'9". We saw Brennan Hauschen play in a massive first half against Xavier, kind of fell off in the second. I don't know if that's going to be a new thing. Without Moore, he's kind of interesting at 3.5, but I don't want to chase that. That's for sure. And then you have, of course, Tyler Burton, who had his best disappearing act against Xavier. It was awful. And then Eric Dixon. Between the two, Dixon versus Burton, the price difference is negligible, only 300. I prefer Dixon, who has put up really good numbers against St. John's throughout his career. There is a St. John's Twitter personality, General Frank, I think is what he goes by. He had posted head-to-head stats between Soriano and Dixon Dixon had gotten the best of him early on in their first like 2 or 3 matchups. Recent matchups, Soriano has gotten the best of him. It is because of Dixon having the ability to shoot threes, Soriano having the ability to muscle him down low. I really like Dixon at 6'9", though. I think he has the chance to put up a huge number, 35, 40 fantasy points. Certainly in play here against this St. John's team. He is my favorite Villanova option. On St. John's, Soriano suffers from the bait, same thing that Baycott was, in that his guards weren't featuring him, and Chris Ledlum was a little confused about who the actual alpha on this team is, which was leaving Soriano to have to put up his offensive game on putbacks. But lately we've seen more of Soriano getting in on the block, getting to do his post moves. He was very solid, 14-12 against Butler, 14-11 against UConn, 18-14 against Xavier, 20-10 against Fordham, 14-4 against Hofstra. That was one of his worst games in a long time. That was just a very oddly played game, and they screwed around and almost lost to a Hofstra team that they shouldn't have, and they had a massive size advantage against. So you have Soriano in that 8.5 range. They've dumbed down the price a little bit. Baycott, PJ Hall, Soriano all dipping under 9K. Certainly has to be in play for that reason alone. And the Villanova front court does not have the toughness that Soriano has. So as long as Coach Pitino has his guys running the offense through Soriano, there's no reason to think he doesn't have another massive monster double-double. Dennis Jenkins, the high usage, everything for this team, putting up just huge scores, back-to-back 40s, priced at 7.6, certainly viable. Without Moore, Villanova would have no chance. And even with Moore, I mean, with a bum knee, Jenkins should be able to do whatever he wants. We know he's going to take a ton of shots. He has a high shot rate, high assist rate, just has really worked out well for this team. I think between the two of Soriano and Jenkins, I would personally lean towards Jenkins just because we know he's going to have the ball in his hands, and Soriano's a little more susceptible to if his guards are going to be sharing the sugar, as they say. I still like RJ Lewis. He was major chalk 2 games ago against Hofstra. Then he went up to 6-1 against Butler. We were the only ones who really used him in that one. Still had some early foul trouble, and he still paid off 25 fantasy points in 21 minutes. The big thing is he took 15 shots against Butler. And I think a lot of the Hofstra game, he had 10 rebounds. His presence was part of the reason why Soriano's peripheral numbers struggled. And that was rectified a bit in the Butler game. And Lewis was also, like I said, in foul trouble, so he played less minutes. But he's still a really good option at 6'2" that nobody's going to use. And he's got a pretty high fantasy point per minute number, taking a ton of shots. And is just somebody that I think could potentially be a slate breaker winner type as long as he stays on the court. 30.5% shot rate, 29% usage rate. Both of those lead the team through the 4 games that he's played. 26% combined rebounding rate, 5.5% steal rate, drawing 6.4 fouls per 40. Now, a lot of those numbers will normalize once he's played more, but it's clear when he's out there, he's taking shots, and Pitino definitely believes in him. Now, the starting lineup with the last game here and Ledlum back after missing the game against Hofstra, Dennis Jenkins, Joel Soriano, Chris Ledlum, Jordan Dingle, and RJ Lewis. What happened was Glenn Taylor did not get to start for the first time in quite a while, and ended up playing less than a minute. I think he logged 30 seconds, I think is what it was, which is kind of alarming. He's been a value play that we've looked at and have been able to utilize throughout the season, but if he's back to not starting, you can't use him. If he gets back in the starting lineup, then he's fine and he's usable. But I think at this point, the lineup, we knew the presence of Ledlum was going to probably hurt Jordan Dingle. And I didn't think they'd pull Lewis from the starting lineup because of his presence. It ended up hurting Glenn Taylor. Now, Dingle played only 20 minutes. He was relatively, ineffective in that one after playing 29 minutes in the Hofstra game and being extremely effective. The Penn transfer just has not fit into this team. There's a bit too many guards for him to go from a alpha role on Penn to the, sixth option on a team. It's just not working out for him. He's only 5'2", which is a really nice price for a player of his caliber, but he's just not got the role, the minutes, the shot attempts with Ledlam, Jenkins, Lewis, and Soriano in front of him. And also the emergence of Brady Dunlap, perhaps, who just barely plays at all this season. And then against Butler, he's super effective. He blocked Jalen Thomas, like viciously blocked Jalen Thomas, which, a Butler center. I made the comment the other day that it was kind of like when Jordan, psyched and shook Brian Russell in the finals and his soul left his body. And that's like one of those like all-time career-ending moments for Brian Russell. It wasn't to that level necessarily, but it sure felt like it because I don't know if you guys have seen Brady Dunlap. He's one of those dudes that is on TikTok and he just doesn't look like he would be blocking a tough kid like Jalen Thomas. But he also was knocking down threes with reckless abandon. 13 points, 2 rebounds, a block, and a steal, 20.5 fantasy points at 3.7. Now, we're not going to run to roster Brady Dunlap because he usually plays under 10 minutes. But after a performance like that, and Pitino rode him so hard, we could see another game with Dunlap playing 15-plus minutes. I think a lot of it had to do with the hot hand. He was playing really defensively. He was the best player on the court for a time. And obviously, anyone playing elite defense is going to get playing time in a Rick Pitino system. So tread carefully there. We'll talk to our guy Stills in the Discord and see what he thinks about it. But I would say he's probably not going to be a factor in this one, but we'll see. And then Naheem Aline, 4-4, playing consistent 20-plus minutes. He is there as a value if you want him. But still a believer in Lewis, and Jenkins is just about as safe as it gets. Auburn versus Arkansas. We now arrive at a busted price on the slate. Looking at it, Auburn 2-point favorites. I know a lot of people are already talking about betting Arkansas. Just a no bet for me. Both of those teams, I don't know how you could trust either of them, honestly, for betting purposes. 157 total. We know the deal with Auburn. It's really come to the point with Coach Pro where unless a guy is so cheap, you really can't use him because competitive or blowouts, we're going to see 9, 10, 11 guys, maybe even 12 some games where he thinks he's Leonard Hamilton, light here or something because we're seeing the starters, Jalen Williams, Janai Broome, Aiden Holloway, Denver Jones, Chris Moore playing 15 to 25 minutes. Then we're seeing Katie Johnson, Trey Donaldson, who I love, Chad Baker, Chaney Johnson, Dylan Cardwell, and sometimes Liar Berman, who are playing 5 to 25 minutes. Now, Chad Baker has been, for a while, the consistent sixth man. But now his minutes have taken a tumble, and he also is barely eclipsing 20. And this is just leading to a situation in which we really can't use any Auburn guys in anything other than GPP lineups. Like, you're an MME guy, you get exposure to this team because they play fast. They're involved in high-scoring games usually. They have an absolute slate-breaking stud in Janai Broome, but 23 minutes for Janai Broome is not enough. He needs to be playing more. We saw him play 28 against Penn. He put up 52. 52, but he played 19 minutes against a UNC Asheville team that they should have been able to take care of. They didn't, and they ended up just getting pelted, and he played 19 minutes, scored 6 real points, had 22 fantasy points, but if you're paying almost $9K for Broome, you don't want to see all those 20 fantasy point games that he has and all those sub 22-minute games that he has. It makes it extremely difficult. Now, Trey Donaldson had been our guy early in the season. We were getting some pretty nice games off the bench for him, but that was at 4-2. Now we're talking about 5-3. Hard to use him. Aiden Holloway sitting there at 5-5. He was chalky on certain slates, but at this point, we're not getting enough minutes for any of these Auburn guys. Now, again, Auburn plays a style. They're top 70 in tempo, top 15 in offensive efficiency, top 20 in defensive efficiency. Should note that. But they are just not playing a rotation tight enough for me to get excited about them right now. And I'd like to think as we get into conference play, Coach Pearl tightens that up a little bit, but I don't know if he will. And it's just we're all suffering because of it. Okay, I know you care about the DFS community, Coach Pearl. Do the right thing. All right, Arkansas. This is the team in this game we want to talk about. Khalif Battle comes with a injury designation. He is dealing with an ankle issue. He has been practicing. It sounds like he's going to be fine. He suffered a sprain in game. I don't expect him to miss time, but those ankle and injuries, those can be tricky. And he could theoretically see less minutes because of it. Now, looking at that game against Wilmington, they gave up 90 to them. That Wilmington team, they're not so bad at 9-3 with a win over Kentucky on the road. Might have forgotten about that. They gave Arkansas a game. Anyways, Arkansas scored 106, and the starting lineup there, Devo Davis, Trevon Brazile, Tremont Mark, Chandler Lawson, which, that can sometimes be Jalen Graham, Chandler Lawson, Kai Mitchell, Jeremiah Davenport. We know those guys are going to they're going to be like the token fifth guy in that starting lineup and play 9 to 12 minutes, not worth using. But Keon Menafield, the Washington Huskies transfer, did get the start against Wilmington after making his debut back on December 16th against Lipscomb. Now, he wasn't part of the NCAA, wave of guys being eligible. He wasn't a two-time transfer. It was only his first time. His was academics, so he was academically ineligible until that point. Now that he's eligible, they got him in there. He played 19 minutes against Lipscomb off the bench, 2 points or 3 rebounds, shot 1 for 3. What you'd expect from a guy who hasn't played, in a couple months. Abilene Christian plays 28 minutes off the bench, 11 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists. A better performance to be sure, 4 for 8 from the field. Gets to start against Wilmington, plays 35 minutes, usage rate of 32% in that game, 17 free throw attempts. This is what Keon Menafield does. This is where he's at his best. 4 rebounds, 5 assists, a huge, huge night for him. Menafield is a hell of a bucket getter. He can drive to the hoop on anyone. There are very few defenders that can keep him on the 1-on-1 from getting to the lane. And when he drives, he usually ends up at the foul line. That is how good he is. At Washington, he was fantastic. I hated seeing him leave. But seeing him on Arkansas, looking at what his rates are already developing into and what kind of player he's going to be here, he has to be rostered in all formats in every lineup possible. And DK made that relatively easy by pricing him at only 4.6K. Now, I have him tentatively penciled in for about 27 minutes. Now, keep in mind the Musselman rotation, like certain guys, like Chandler Lawson could play 30, have a big game, and then the very next game not start and play 3 minutes. Or he could start and still play 3 minutes. That's a very real thing that Musselman does with all of his players. It makes it really difficult to use anyone in Arkansas. And for the most part, we've just used, when he's priced cheaply, Trevon Brazile, sometimes Tremont Mark. But I don't get the same level of nerves that I do using other Arkansas guys. And even if Menafield was priced at like 6K, I think I'd still be talking about using him. At 27 minutes, I have him at around 22, 23 actual fantasy points. And I think he's probably primed for more than that in this game against Auburn. So a very obvious play there at 4.6. There's your value. There you go. A gift. 90% owned. Shocked if he isn't. I mentioned Brazile. He's been our dude, but 6'7", I'm just okay there. It is lower than he's been in the last month or so. We know he has major upside, but he's consistently dealing with ailments as well. We saw, he suffered the season-ending injury last year. Now he's got an ankle that's kind of spiked up, and I probably not using him right now until we can get him healthy. Tremont Mark at 6'4", He is mostly a scorer for this team. He does it very well, but the introduction of Menifield certainly has me worried, although he scored 25 real against Abilene Christian and 18 real against UNC Wilmington, 17 real against Lipscomb. So the presence of Menifield has not hurt Mark. Mark and Menifield have been scoring a lot, if not most, of the Arkansas points when they're on together. Devo Davis at 6K, you know the deal with him already. You saw him pop 37 against Wilmington. If you want to chase it, we've been having him for 3 years now. If you don't understand the dynamics at play with a player like Devo Davis, he's just not a guy you can chase. He will go from 8 fantasy points to 40 in the blink of an eye. He can go from a nice first half to a poor second half, vice versa. Like, there's just no using Devo Davis at 6K in anything other than a GPP alt line at this point. You should know that if you've been playing at all, but if you're newer, just know Devo Davis. It might look good that last game. Very unlikely he replicates that, as he's just very inconsistent. Chandler Lawson at 5.2, relatively easy fade there. You see him going from, case in point, look at his last 2 games. 24 minutes against Abilene, 27 fantasy points. Then he goes to 9 the very next game. That is just so typical with Chandler Lawson and the way that Musselman uses him. Same thing he does with Jalen Graham and Mekhi Mitchell. Now, Ellis, coming into the season, Arkansas fans were excited about Ellis. I myself was not. Corey, one of my good buddies, who's an Arkansas super fan, he just couldn't get enough Ellis and talking about him. And I said, I don't understand where he fits into this team with a guard heavy group. He goes from a Louisville team with no guards at all, so he gets to play the entire game, take every shot he wants, to a Arkansas team with Menifield, who wasn't eligible at the time, Tremont Mark, Devo Davis, Khalif Battle. Like, there's just way too many options here. Where does he fit into this? And he played a lot of minutes early in the season, but as soon as his inefficient, high-volume style of play was more of a detriment to this team than it was to Louisville, because, again, they didn't have anyone else, his minutes evaporated literally overnight. Went from playing 30-plus minutes to sub-10, and I don't know that those minutes are going to come back. Really wonder if Ellis is kind of wondering or kicking himself, thinking that he might have chose wrong where to go here. So he's only 4.6, which, geez, L. Ellis at 4.6, 30 fantasy point per game guy. Can't even use him. We do have Layden Blocker there, whose minutes are evaporating as well with the presence of Menifield. He's a really solid youngster. I think he's got a bright future. We saw him put up some big scores there in the middle of November to into December, but you can't really use him right now because of the fact that Menifield is going to get those minutes. And there's really nobody else on this team you can use. Jeremiah Davenport, same thing. Goes from a situation where he's playing heavy minutes, big role for Cincy. Now he's barely playing for Arkansas. But you see, against Lipscomb, 27 minutes, 23 fantasy points. Then he goes to 4 and 5 minutes in back-to-back games. There's just no rhyme or reason to this rotation at times. It probably wouldn't even shock me if Menifield played 4 minutes after playing so much, but I don't think that's going to happen. It seems like he does that to his wings more. I think Menifield is certainly locked into a role. So he's the only one coming out of this that I'm confidently using in my main. But again, everybody is going to be using him. Not a secret. Providence versus Creighton. Now, Creighton's 11-point favorites. The total's 139. This is one that screams betting Providence, but we do have to make the recognition that Bryce Hopkins is out for the season after sustaining a ACL tear. And when he went down in the game against Seton Hall, it didn't look good. You at this point, we watch enough sports. When you see a guy go down like that, you instantly know it's a blown knee, a torn something, like he's done. And that's truly unfortunate. So Providence will have to go without Bryce Hopkins, and somebody who averaged 15 points, 9 rebounds per game. That is a big, big blow. Not a great three-point shooter. In fact, he's a big detriment on that side of things, but he does so many other things for this Providence team. And suddenly a Friar squad that is rolling at 11-3 under Kim English, first year coach after Ed Cooley went to Georgetown, looks like they could potentially be in trouble as they get into the heart of their conference schedule. Without Hopkins, 26% usage rate, 27% shot rate. This is a very big loss for them. It does elevate the remaining players, obviously. Devin Carter, who has blown, all of his previous career highs out the water in terms of efficiency, has really broken out as a star player, playing 75.8% of the available minutes, but I expect that to go much higher. He will be in the game for most going forward. 25.1% usage rate, 24.8% shot rate, has the highest defensive rebounding rate on the team, if you can believe that, at 22%. 6'3" guard out there mixing it up, getting boards, and he has a 4% block rate. This dude can jump out of the gym. 59% on 2-point field goals, 39% from long range. Devin Carter is a dude. At 8'9", it's a high price, but Creighton, he's just putting up 40s like it's his job. I think we're going to see him play likely 38, 39, possibly all 40 minutes. Like, there's just not going to be an opportunity for them to take him out. And he's shown that he can play these heavy minutes. I don't necessarily worry about fatigue in January, but if it continues into March, tired legs could be a thing. But right now, I think we can continue to ride Devin Carter, and he's going to put up some big numbers. You also have my guy, Josh Oduro, who is really, really playing well. He just absolutely obliterated Butler right before Christmas, 19, 14, and 6. That was a fun one. In the loss there against Seton Hall, 21 shot attempts, only 2 of them from long range. So Oduro was getting a high volume, and he is going to absorb a lot of Hopkins shots as well. Now, he didn't rebound well against Seton Hall, which is a big reason why they lost, but he still put up 30 fantasy points. 8-1 for Oduro is a high price. I get that going up against Ryan Kalkbrenner. Foul trouble could be in play, yes, but I don't know that Oduro, they'll have the luxury of sitting him even if he gets into foul trouble. So I really like the Oduro play as well. Maybe a little more on the GPP side there because there are some risks that aren't there for Devin Carter, but it is a discount nonetheless and somebody that we have to consider. Then you have the other 2 members of the starting lineup before Bryce Hopkins goes out. Ticket Gaines, who sits there at 5'8", played 35 minutes against the Hall, but only a terrible game at that. I think Ticket is an okay option. The price of 5'8" is intriguing, appealing, yes, but I don't know that he is somebody at this point that we can realistically rely on right now, because 35 minutes, 6% usage rate, 2 points, that's pretty tough. That is a beyond fit bidding game there, but he is going to play heavy minutes. Just look at his last 4, 35, 41, 32, and 29 minutes. Now he's going to be tasked with playing even more. Absolutely in consideration. Jaden Pierre, same thing, 35 plus minutes, only 4'6", reliant on his scoring. He can get hot. He's very streaky. Who takes Bryce Hopkins' starting spot? That is the question. Looking at it, after Hopkins went down, we saw those minutes basically go to Corey Floyd and Garwi Duell. We still had Oduro playing the 5. Gaines is tall enough to play some small ball 4, so they could bring in Floyd or Duell as the 3. We also saw a little bit of Rafael Castro there. He played 6 minutes, but I do think we start to see Castro play more, and that's especially going to be true here in this matchup against Creighton and Kalkbrenner. If Oduro gets into foul trouble, we will see some more of him. Castro does sit there at 4K. GPP look at best, but he is somebody that has upside. You'll be surprised to hear he was good on their foreign trips and their exhibition games. He deserves more minutes, and now we'll probably get a chance to see those. Now, the likely starter stepping in there between Duell and Floyd, this is where we're going to get our other bit of value here, depending on that starting lineup. Garwi is 3'6", looking at it. Future NBA draft pick. Now, we tried to use him early in the season. Didn't have a lot of success there with using him. So he's obviously super raw, but there's going to be an opportunity for him to possibly play 28 to 30 minutes. And it might be a situation where they'll ride the hot hand. And if that's the case, scoring wise, I think Corey Floyd might be a little bit more interesting, who's also 3.6. Also has a decent chance at peripherals here, but neither of them are home run, plays by any means, but sub 4K, getting starter minutes there, certainly on board, and we'll see. It could be Castro. If Castro to start, then we can play him at 4K, but I'm just kind of going to lean into whoever does start there. My personal preference would be Garwi Duell. When you look at rates here, he has a usage rate over 16%, a assist rate of 23.2%, shooting 31% from long range. Defensively, this is where he can start to really impact games. He's a very good defender for them when he is out there. 4.5% block rate, 3% steal rate. Corey Floyd, shot rate of 15%. Now, he's only made 16% of his triples. He's taken the same amount as Garwi, and he's made 4 compared to 8. Drawing just over 2.5 fouls per 40. Doesn't have any other particularly eye-popping or relevant rates to speak of. So it is I think more minutes for Garwi is a better for DFS situation. But again, we'll wait and see how that shakes out and who actually gets the starting spot before we decide. Creighton, it's a two-horse race for using Creighton, guys. I don't even really love Kalkbrenner, even though I think he could do well in this matchup against Providence. 7.6 is a nice price for him, certainly in play. But to me, I think you got to decide on if you're using anybody in this game, that is for Creighton, Trey Alexander or Baylor Shireman. Both are just electric, high upside, elite fantasy options. They do all of the heavy lifting for this team. Both have usage rates above 26%. Both have shot rates of 27.1%. They are so similar in almost every category. Defensive rebounding rate, 20.9% for Baylor, 17.5% for Trey Alexander. Both of them have assist rates of 22%, and both are shooting above 30% from long range. It's uncanny how similar they have been and how consistent they have been as well. 8.4 for Baylor Shireman, 8.2 for Trey Alexander. These are both nice prices. Alexander has hit 31-plus fantasy points in 4 straight games against the likes of Alabama, Villanova, Marquette, and Georgetown. Baylor Shireman, a little bit higher upside, I'd say, than Alexander, and he's maybe even a little more consistent, but I do still lean into Trey Alexander just a little bit more. But Baylor is an elite rebounder. We know that. He can shoot threes, 7 for 13 against Marquette. Just a very good, viable option there. I do like the idea of using one of those guys, but still, Providence defense, even without Hopkins, has to be respected. And honestly, Hopkins defensively, probably one of the weaker links of that group. So I don't know. I don't know that I really want to start targeting against Providence just yet, but we'll see. Kalkbrenner, as I mentioned, 7.6 is okay. And then there's really no one else. Like Ashworth, who comes over from Utah State, sitting there at 5.1. It just hasn't worked out. Like if we could squeeze about 20 fantasy points out of him here at 5.1, he's okay. And he definitely could, but he's just a very low-end option. Mason Miller there at 4.8, operating as the 5th starter. No real upside there. If he's low 4Ks, we can talk, but at 4.8, almost 5, I don't really see it as a necessary, play. All right, moving on. We got the last 3 games here, and then we'll be done. The matchup here between West Virginia and Houston. Now, Houston is 21-point favorites in a conference game. Whew, that is rough. 134.5 total. That is extremely tough. Now, West Virginia side is really intriguing. They don't have Jesse Edwards, but they have played really well, even though they're not necessarily winning games with Ray Battle back. My man Raekwon Battle grew up just north of where I live. Great player. Didn't work out for the Huskies, unfortunately. Goes to Montana State, just goes absolute nuts. And now he gets himself to West Virginia, gets the waiver after, the court talk, and he's just been phenomenal. 37.5% usage rate, a shot rate of 44%. This is in 3 games, 31% from long range, steal rate of 5.5%, and he's actually rebounding a little bit too. Always love Ray Battle. The 7.9 price for him, it's too, let's be honest, it's too cheap. It's not 6.7 like when he was playing Ohio State, and surprisingly, he wasn't like super chalky that day. But he's just phenomenal. But playing against Houston, I usually have a rule where I'm not trying to use players against Houston too often, except for when it's on a smaller slate or we're into tournament time. It's going to be a tough decision because I think he could get handcuffed, but at the same time, he's going to take 20, 25 shots. And that kind of volume is just, it's ridiculous. He's going to make shots. They're not going to hold him 0. He's probably not going to rebound as well as he has since getting the waiver. But that's probably the toughest decision for me on the slate is whether to roster Ray Battle or not in a tough spot against Houston. They have Noah Farrakhan eligible as well, played the last 3. He's been a very strong, consistent scorer for them as well so far. Took 18 shots in the Ohio State game. He's there at 5'9". Somebody to at least consider. I'd be less likely to use him against Houston than in Battle, but those are the 2 guys that have really been kind of crushing it. They've got Kirk Creason now. Really inconsistent for fantasy-wise as well. Shots not really falling. A cook under 6K. I think he's probably destined for foul trouble. I don't know that we can really consider using him either. Now, West Virginia has bled fantasy points at multiple positions. So we do want to look at Houston exposure here. With Houston, they're a team that frustrates, though, right? Like, you've heard me kind of complain throughout the years, Jamal Shed, like roster him, falls on his face, don't roster him, blows up the slate. It's kind of a love-hate relationship, but this matchup doesn't get much better in a conference game for this Houston team. Jamal Shed is only 7-1, which is more than reasonable for the amount of minutes he'll play and his role on this team. He is a very strong secondary type of play. I'm not coring him, but he is a guy that I'm absolutely looking to roster if I land there. 23.4% usage rate. He has the 4th highest assist rate in the country at 42%, 8th highest steal rate, just under 6%. He's actually making 39% of his triples. Now, he's only taken 36 compared to Manny Sharp's 82 and the 106 of LJ Cryer. However, this is a career high to this point of 38% if it continues, and he took over 123s in each of the last 2 seasons. So look out for Jamal Shed, who has suddenly become a dead-eye 3-point shooter and always consistent with his peripheral stats. LJ Cryer, a bit more reliant on his scoring ability. This would be a game for him to do extremely well in. I do think he's a nice GPP look. Shot rate of 29%, highest on the team. So certainly looking at Cryer. You have Manny Sharp here. The team is going to be without Terry Arsenault, who's a very key younger player due for a bigger role. With him out, we're seeing Manny Sharp absorb his minutes and more, going from this upper teens, low 20s per minute player to 28, 29, 30 minutes per game. That's 6K. Manny Sharp in this matchup, believe it or not, is probably even better play than Cryer or Shed. Sharp is knocking down a high clip, over 36% of his threes as well. Shot rate has ballooned to 26%. His usage rate has actually become the highest on the team at 25% as well, drawing 5.4 fouls per 40. Sharp has just kind of exceeded all expectations for me, and I think most people. Very good look at 6K. If you can't get to Shed at 7-1 and you've got, to save 1,100, Sharp is one of the stronger 6K plays on the slate by far. Juwan Roberts has the questionable tag, dealing with a knee issue. Now, he's going to be available. He comes into it with the true questionable tag. I don't know how many minutes to expect, though, with this knee issue. I think we could see Roberts, who did miss that last game, end up playing somewhere between 12 to 15 only. And if that's the case, he's obviously not worth looking at. But if he doesn't play, then you do have a bit of intrigue here for sub 5K option Joseph Tugler, another younger player who absolutely dominated against Penn in 21 minutes, 13.7 rebounds, 2 blocks, 2 steals, hit a career high 31 fantasy points. Tugler is a guy who fits the system extremely well. So he would be in play without Roberts. And then, of course, you have Javi Francis, who last year was a high fantasy point per minute guy, high usage rate. This year, it hasn't necessarily clicked for him, although in the last 2 games with Roberts shelved, he scored over 22 fantasy points in each in about 20 to 22 minutes. So his minutes are still kind of capped out in the 20s, which is tough. But he's definitely absorbing the rebounds of Roberts and even picking up some extra shot attempts, going from 2 to 3 shots up to 7 to 8 in the last 2. So Francis and Tugler are 2 guys to be aware of if Roberts ends up not playing. With Roberts playing, I think what happens is they just cannibalize each other and they end up all just playing some minutes. And then you throw in, Malik Wilson into that for 18-ish minutes, and it just kind of clouds everyone. Still not enough minutes for Damian Dunn, who is only 4'7". We know his role from Temple and what he can provide us. And he even put up a nice 11.6 rebound, 3 steal, 24 fantasy point game against Penn recently for Houston. That 4.7 price point is certainly intriguing for Damian Dunn, but he's just another one of those guys kind of stuck in a 20-minute role. So it really just becomes Shed, Cryer, and Sharp for your main lineup, picking one of those. For me, Shed is a guy that I want to get to. I'm not prioritizing him, and if I don't have the salary once the rest of my lineup is built, I will look to Manny Sharp. I do think I want one of Sharp or Shed in my main lineup, though. So that is kind of how I'm approaching that. TCU versus Kansas. Man, this is going to be a tough one. Kansas 9-point favorites, total of 152. When it comes to Kansas, it's really just Kevin McCullough or Hunter Dickinson. Now, there are other guys who are providing strong fantasy numbers at times. KJ Adams, for one, sitting there at 6'8". DeJuan Harris, who is Mr. He only scores when he has to, putting up 20-plus fantasy points per game. And then you have the freshman Elmarco Jackson, who played 27 minutes against Wichita and scored 20 fantasy points at 4'7", to be aware of. And Johnny Furphy, who sits there at 3'9", playing about 15 to 16 minutes. Certainly a GPP value. We saw Nick Timberlake play additional minutes against Yale. We did predict that to go backwards against Wichita State with Furphy back. That did happen. Timberlake's just not playing. So again, the real decision for your main is if you got the salary and you're going to pay up for Hunter Dickinson or McCullough. Now, I don't mind Dickinson at 9.5. Obviously, we just saw him completely destroy Wichita State 22-13. He has had double-digit rebounds in each of his last 5 games. That includes against UMKC, Yale, Wichita, Indiana, and Missouri. TCU front court is a little more violent than any of those teams. They are dealing with a Jacoby Coles who has not been healthy or available recently. They do have Xavier Cork, but he doesn't have any hope of defending Hunter Dickinson. And Manny Miller is more of a inside-out guy. So I do think this is a matchup in which Dickinson can and probably will dominate. But the way Kevin McCullough has been playing for $300 less, it's really hard for me not to want to go there, especially in a matchup against TCU where I think he can definitely exploit them. McCullough's numbers have just been really solid, and dating back to his freshman year when he was a min-price option, he was always a pretty good peripherals producer, right? But now he's scoring and taking a ton of shots, and his ability to score 30 real on top of already strong secondary stats makes him have that slate breaking upside, especially that we've seen over the last month of the season. 5th now on the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings. Dickinson has fallen out of the top 10. Numbers wise, 85.4% of the available minutes for McCullough, 26% usage rate, 26.5% shot rate, and assist rate of 23%, drawing 6 fouls per 40, making 40% of his 3-point shots, which is a career high. Previously shot 30% for Kansas last year, 31% for Texas Tech over the previous 3 years. Hard to imagine. McCullough's in his 5th season, and he's having an absolute monster season. So between the two, if you want to pay up for a Kansas guy, I'm going with McCullough. Even though I think Dickinson has maybe a slightly better matchup, I just can't imagine not paying for McCullough right now if you are paying up at all. On the TCU side, we don't have to shy away against Kansas. It's not as if they're, they are a strong defense, but you can certainly look to guys against them, and they can and will put up some numbers. Now, TCU is a team I liked starting out, especially when they were healthy. They were rolling, but Jacoby Coles, who has been dealing with a stress foot injury, and actually it's been kind of quiet. They did not play in the last game, but he's been questionable, and he's also been playing with that issue. So I guess it's been a lingering foot issue that they didn't really talk about, and that explains why Cole's production kind of fell off a cliff a little bit. Sitting there at 5.3, I think he would be a really nice option if he hadn't just missed some time and he wasn't still dealing with that injury. So as of now, you just can't use him, even at 5.3. Charles O'Bannon Jr., he's dealing with an injury as well, a thumb issue. He is expected to be available. They're going to need him, to at least log some minutes there. He's not a play necessarily, but it does impact guys like Xavier Cork, who saw those additional minutes without O'Bannon and Coles. Avery Anderson, who has been seeing a nice little spike, and then obviously Trevion Tennyson, who has been starting over Jameer Nelson, has played 30 minutes in back-to-back games and played pretty well. I think they probably will still ride with Tennyson as a starter, but the Kansas perimeter D is where I get especially worried. And if Nelson isn't starting and it's Tennyson, there's a good chance that he'll have Harris on him for a time. And if that's the case, Tennyson's going to get bageled. So be very, very careful using him. Ernest Uday, who had the monster 47 against Texas A&M Corpus Christi in 20 minutes, his price goes from 4.8 to 6. Don't chase that. He's not going to put up 50 against Kansas. So it really just leaves you with a really appealing priced Jameer Nelson at 6.2, which if he's not starting, I don't really want to use him. And even if he does start, that means Harris is going to be on him. So I think Nelson's a fade even at 6.2. Let that price come down even further. Have a bad game, be 5.5, and we'll attack. Micah Peavy at 7K, Emmanuel Miller at 7.7. They've been the best two players on the team, with Nelson going through some struggles recently and getting benched. Miller's had a couple of down games recently. That has got his price down to 7.7. I do think he stays out of foul trouble for the most part in this game, but rebounds-wise, I don't think he'll find much success, and his overall upside is going to be dramatically impacted by that. So mainly on the Kansas side here, and that's mostly to do with the fact that TCU is going to have more players available, and the prices of the players that they do have are not very advantageous. All right, last game on the slate, Virginia versus NC State. Let's get it. Virginia versus NC State. NC State 1.5 point favorites, total of 127.5. So the lowest total on the slate, as usual, right? You've got Virginia on the side here against a tough NC State team overall. Now, pulling it up, you guys pretty much know the story on Virginia. Top 15 defense, one of the slowest paced teams in the country. Offensively, they've had their struggles. 11-3, they did suffer that embarrassing loss to Notre Dame, followed it up with a win against Louisville. Now, Ken Pom has them as 1 point losers to NC State on the road. And this will be a same situation as Notre Dame. If NC State comes out hot, hitting shots, Virginia just simply won't have the ability to keep up. But if it plays slower, NC State's missing shots, or they're not exploiting 3-point shooting against this team, then Virginia is able to grind it out and eventually wear them down. So that's going to be the plan of attack for Virginia. You have Reese Beekman at 7.9. He's always a decent enough option. You're going to get about 28 to 30 fantasy point floor. His price dropping to 7.9 from 8.5 definitely makes him more viable. It seems like DK's dumbed down some of the prices for this slate, which isn't necessarily ideal. And then you have Ryan Dunn there at 7.2 coming off his near 40 against Louisville. Very similar players in that they contribute in rebounding, assists, multiple categories. Scoring can sometimes be spotty for both, which is why it's kind of hard for me to pay the prices for them. If they could at least just, Dunn especially score somewhere between 12 to 15 real points consistently, he'd be a totally elite option, but he just doesn't do that. They did price Isaac McNeely back up. We got on him at 4.5. Poor his first half, but he got hot in the second half, ended up putting up 25, which did raise his price up to 5-4 from 4-5, another 900. He's in play for sure against NC State, but at 5-4, he's nowhere near a plug and play like he just was. Don't like Jake Groves here. Leon Bond surprisingly played just 8 minutes against Louisville. That definitely was something that I expected to be closer to 20. He didn't score any real points, but he did have 10 fantasy points because of his high-level peripherals. Rebounds, steals, block shots, gets assists. Bond's a very active player when he's out there. He's just not very offensive. I wish he was playing a 20 to 25 minute per game role because I think he would be capable of putting up 25 fantasy points a game while scoring less than 5 real points. Don't have a lot of interest in anyone else on Virginia. For NC State, not really on the guards, right? Like this guards group against Virginia, I feel like they're going to struggle. Like Jaden Taylor, who's my guy, sitting there at 6'1", shot 3 of 13 against Notre Dame. It took some late game heroics by Burns to finish them off. It's pretty tough to get to him versus Virginia. Then you look at Dennis Parker, the freshman. He's probably going to struggle in this game. Can't use him. DJ Horn, who plays multiple positions, he might succeed okay because of his ability to rebound, but he's 6'9", 7K. A little bit of a high price there. Alex, who mentioned Casey Morsell, a revenge game of sorts, if you will. Played 35 minutes against Notre Dame, 13 fantasy points in 35 minutes. Typical Casey Morsell. I can't roster him, but he's 4'9". If he ends up being chalky, then whatever. Where I'm looking, of course, is the DVP spot. Now, the last slate Virginia was on, they played against that Louisville team. Myself and Mike Kutry both wanted to exploit that DVP by using Brandon Hutley-Hatfield. Now, BHH played 33 minutes in that game. Unfortunately, Louisville is just so porous everywhere else, he couldn't get any shots off. 5 shot attempts, so he had 9 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and a block. Obviously, didn't get it done in his 7K price range there, but he played 33 minutes, and he was okay on the glass. They just couldn't get him any shots. Looking at the Wolfpack and DJ Burns, who comes in at a unappealing to most price of 7.1K. The game winner against Notre Dame on what appeared to be a somewhat busted play, as he wasn't the primary there, but he made things happen. Burns is a tough, athletic, monster of a player. Minutes are capped. We do see him occasionally hit over 30, and when he does, he's a mammoth. But we're probably looking at mid-20s minutes here for Burns, which at 7-1 obviously isn't the most ideal. We want him to be playing over 30. But when you look at his rates and what he provides for this team, 25% usage rate, 26% shot rate, combined rebounding rate above 20%, an assist rate of 19%, got a little bit of that Derek Walker, archetype, and a foul rate draws fouls over 3.1 per 40, 3.9 per 40 called, and a block rate of 3%. So contributes all over. Burns is a bit undersized, but still the Virginia front court does not have the bodies to stop him from doing what he wants in the paint. He should be able to get off shots, and I really hope we see him approach 30 minutes because I feel like a big rebounding game is going to be in store for him. Now, when you look at previous history against Virginia, going back to February 7th, I usually like to go back and point out like, hey, this worked out really well against this team. Now, he played 21 minutes, 8 points, 6 rebounds, an assist, and a block, but he turned it over 6 times and had 4 fouls. He was very bothered in that particular game, and it didn't quite work out for him there. I believe that was the only time they played Virginia, but I'm still liking Burns. I still am a believer in this DVP. I will likely get exposure to him somewhere. I will be put to the test if I want to use him in my main after getting burned by BHH. I know Burns will have sub 5% ownership, and he might not even have like 2 or 3%. Anyone using Burns tomorrow will probably be in the FTN community at that. 15 shot attempts against Notre Dame, though. I think it's worth mentioning he's taken 10-plus shots in 4 of his last 5, and he's just going to be too much for this Virginia front court. If he can stay out of foul trouble, he is going to be phenomenal. I think you could see him put up a 35 in this spot. Going up against Tennessee in a game 79-70, he put up 15, 5, and 5. 5 assists. The dude gets doubled down. He kicks it to the outside. Guys hit shots. He's playing that quarterback role. DJ Burns, this is your opportunity, DJ. Don't let us down, my friend. All right, that is the slate. We started a little bit late tonight. I know it went long. Definitely, these late night shows can be tough. I appreciate everybody who continues to support them. I will have timestamps in the comment there so that you guys can click to certain games that you want to hear. Let's do a core real quick, props, and then we'll head out. So looking at it, this is a variety of different options on a slate like this. It's definitely going to be a fun one. I'm going to be up late tonight writing and updating my minutes projections. Looking forward to a fun one. No show in the morning, so I can kind of wake up, do my thing, and not have to rush around. There's no college football. We can just focus clearly on what we need to do here with college basketball. All right. So first core is going to be Keon Benefield, which is, I believe, should be industry chalk at 4.6, right? There's just no other way around that. Core play number 2, one of Jamal Shed. Well, I said I wasn't going to core, but looking at that West Virginia matchup, or Manny Sharp. Right now, I'm leaning in on Manny Sharp at 6K. Will give us some flexibility there with our lineups to do what we need to do. But I just really like this spot for Houston, targeting against West Virginia more often than not. And then the third core, this is really tough because this doesn't have a ton of super slam plays. There's a lot of different ways that you can go on this one, and I feel like we'll see a big variety of lineups. But going against the grain a little bit here, Tyree Samuel of Florida against Kentucky. I don't know if in the morning when I go and actually make my lineup that he stays in, but this just feels like a sub 10% owned spot where he's going to continue to play at a high level and put up another 35 to 40 at 7-7. So Samuel tentatively penciled in there as the third member of the core, but I would anticipate tomorrow morning that being slightly different. As it stands, we'll go Manny Sharp, Keon Benefield, and Tyree Samuel. All right, props-wise, there's not a lot on PrizePicks, and I looked at it before the show because the fantasy scores goes up in the morning. There's none up right now that I particularly love. There is Cormac Ryan, 17.5 PRA, which is a decent enough over. I do like Trey Mitchell under 21.5 PRA. I think he sees his rebounding numbers go down in this one. And then I like Eric Dixon going up against the St. John squad here. Just missed his PRA yesterday by 1, and it was at 23.5. I do like that over 23.5 against this St. John's team. He has good history against them. All right, looking at DK props real quick. There were a couple that stood out to me. All right. So Blaine Kinson is struggling right now. They're going up against Louisville, which he could absolutely obliterate, but the PRA number is a little high at 24.5. So I'm going to take the under 24.5 at -115 against Louisville on the road until he proves to us that he's got his shot making ability back. And I don't feel like he is. He might have a decent enough game, but 25 combined PRA seems like it might be a little tough for him. So we're going to hit the under on that one. I do lean into my Andre Hyatt call. That is my sneak play against Iowa. 18.5 PRA at -125. Am taking the over there. Feel pretty good about Hyatt. If I end up pulling Samuel out of my core, it would probably be for Hyatt. That's how high I am on Andre Hyatt. Dennis Jenkins, it's 22.5. Dennis Jenkins is going to do nasty things against Villanova. It's probably an 18-7-5 type stat line. So over 22.5 PRA. We're riding with Jenkins. Eric Dixon's there at 23.5 as well. Probably do some parlay stuff with those guys tomorrow and the DK kiosk tomorrow when I go there in the morning. And then there was one more, Manny Sharp, over 19.5 PRA at -120. Houston, anybody playing West Virginia is going to be great, but I'm especially high on this Houston guard group against them. They are just going to be so phenomenal. However, they have wasted good matchups before, so be aware of that. There is a prop here that I am taking as well, the point prop for Manny Sharp at 14.5. It's +100. I think we see him take like 15, 16 shots and hits that number. So taking a little bit of plus money there at 14.5. It is a number he's hit in 3 of his last 4. And playing a 30-minute role here against West Virginia, Manny Sharp should do us well. It would help having Francis out just because that's one less person taking shots, but we'll take that on Manny Sharp. All right, that will do it. We are all wrapped up on the big slate here. Again, remember there will be Discord content, meaning a player pool and a core for the 12-game afternoon slate and the 9-game night slate. There is a very jammed together. The last few games are 11 a.m. on the main slate, PST. The afternoon slate starts at 11:15. That's just going to have a lot of overlap. It's going to be chaos. Don't know that the sheet will be updated past the main slate, but we'll definitely try our best and be in contact throughout the day. I don't have work at my day job, so I'm going to be on the laptop, streaming games, watching TV, in Discord, posting starting lineups, thoughts, everything in between, injury news, all that stuff. Please make sure if you don't have a sub that you check out ftndaily.com and see what we're all about for your first month. If you don't like what we have, you can cancel easily. But if you do find that it's a worthwhile thing to have, and in the Discord and the news and making money, green screens, trips to the windows, all that, if that's something you like, definitely check it out. Thanks, everyone. Be back Sunday night for the CFB Super Show, where we'll be talking about your team, the Washington Huskies, in depth. See you guys later.